But I remember it when I'm posing for the photos and they're like, oh, hold up the money. And I have like Matt Savage next to me and he's whispering like, oh, thanks for showering. And I'm like, I did shower this morning. But, that stress sweat for hours, like, you're never actually damp under your arms, but it did smell pretty horrible.
Well, you answered the question people have been wondering about for 22 years. How did Greg Raymer smell immediately after winning the title? Now we know. Welcome once again to Low Rollers, the weekly gambling industry podcast presented by CasinoReports.com in partnership with DraftKings Casino. I'm Eric Raskin, senior editor at Third Planet Media, here to remind you that if you're listening to this podcast via Apple or Spotify or whatever app you use, and you want to be watching this podcast instead of just listening to it, Low Rollers is now on YouTube. And if you're currently watching this podcast and desperately want not to have to see my face, well, you can listen to the audio pod instead. Or you can just close your eyes. That option is always available to you. Coming up in just a few minutes on this week's pod, I'll be joined by the one and only Greg Raymer, better known to some as FossilMan. He was the World Series of Poker Main Event champion in 2004, the year after Moneymaker, and he's gone on a few deep runs since, including the very next year in 2005 as the defending champ. He finished a remarkable 25th and was really rolling until taking a bad beat or two. But he made another deep run this year, beat about 97% of the field, and with the final 9 now decided and the tournament on a 3-week break, this seemed a perfect time to talk to Greg. We'll talk about some of the players at this year's final table. We'll talk about signing fossils. I'll get Greg's take on the WSOP's controversial decision to add a shot clock and on the health of poker overall, and much more. But before I bring on FossilMan, and before I spend a few minutes monologuing about the news of the week, I want to tell you about DraftKings Casino. A big thank you to DraftKings Casino for sponsoring Low Rollers. DraftKings is the home of Flex Spins, the reward program that puts the choice in the hands of the players as to how they want to use their free spins. So here's the deal. New DraftKings Casino players just have to play $5 and they'll get 1,000 Flex Spins. Specifically, that breaks down as 50 Flex Spins a day for 20 days. The player chooses how to use them across a selection of more than 100 slots. Traditional bonus spins restrict players to a single title or a small group of game options, but that's not the case here, hence the word flex before the word spins. So you want to use your flex spins on Cash Eruption one day, Triple Gold the next, one of the Huff and Puff games the day after that, you have that option to redeem your bonus spins how you want. For the promotion, you must be 21 years of age, physically present in Michigan, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, or West Virginia, void in Ontario, eligibility restrictions apply, 1 per new DraftKings Casino customer, opt-in required, game availability may vary, offer ends July 22nd. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER in Michigan, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. And DraftKings Casino connects to our main news item this week because it's one of more than 20 sites that went live on Monday in the Canadian province of Alberta. By volume, by number of sites and apps, this was a huge launch. And obviously, sports betting gets most of the attention. There were reports on the first bets made at various sports books. Jill Dorson wrote a piece for InGame in which a DraftKings executive talked about the good sports calendar timing of the launch with the World Cup and the MLB All-Star Game, and thus this wasn't quite the usual summer sports doldrums. But, of course, put all the attention on sports betting you want. I realize it's the more mainstream topic to write about, but the money will come from online casino. It always does. Now, one notable side topic here is when regulated online gaming launches in a region, it usually brings with it an onslaught of commercials that immediately sour a whole lot of people on the presence of online gambling. If you ask me, it's not 1/10 as brutal as the deluge of political commercials at certain times of year, especially if you live in a swingy state, as I do. I've never angrily muted a sportsbook or casino ad, but still, they can be a lot, and Canadian Parliament is working on establishing a federal framework around gambling ads that may limit when and how often they can run their commercials. For the good of the whole industry, this would be wise. The negatives of problem gambling touch a small percentage of the people in each state or province. The negatives of excessive gambling commercials touch everyone who watches TV or listens to the radio or podcasts or surfs the web or goes on social media. So hopefully Canada does put some restrictions in place. There is already a rule in Alberta regarding promos that operators can offer them via email if you're opted in, or they can display them on the site, but they can't make anyone be involuntarily exposed to the promo offers. They won't be on the public airwaves or social media. That's a fine rule. And so Alberta seems to be off to a promising start. Offering a regulated product is wonderful. Offering a regulated product without seeming excessively predatory is even better. Okay, let's get to this week's interview. Please enjoy a few seconds of music, and when I come back, I'll be joined by Greg FossilMan Raymer. The World Series of Poker main event final table was determined this Monday night, and my guest on the podcast this week will not be among the final 9 competing for $10 million, unfortunately, but he came reasonably close, and he knows what it's like to play at that final table and to win that final table. He is the 2004 WSOP champ. He beat 2,575 other players that year, and this year he outlasted 8,929 other players to finish in 279th place. He is FossilMan Greg Raymer. Greg, welcome to Low Rollers.
Thanks, Eric. I'm really happy you invited me, and I look forward to a fun time here.
We shall try to have a fun time. And let's talk first about your main event run this year, which was mostly a fun time, I presume. Obviously, to go that deep, you need to run good, and you also need to play strong poker. How happy are you with how you played, and how happy are you with how you ran?
I'm pretty happy with how I played. There's definitely some pots where I wish I could go back and make a better decision than I did. But, whenever someone, you hear someone like, oh, I played perfect for this many hours, this many days, and then I made the one mistake. I'm like, bullshit. Of course you didn't play perfect. You bet 10,000 on the river and they called you, maybe they would have called 12 and you could have won some more. Maybe they folded, but they would have folded for 8. You didn't have to risk as much. There's always things that can be a little better. And then there are things that you definitely just like, hey, that was a mistake. And I can think of some hands where it's like, oh, I see bet the flop and I should have bet the turn. But it was kind of like, not a great flop for my hand, but I've got showdown value. Do I really want to bluff? But in hindsight, there was still a bunch of hands you could have folded out on the turn. And it was one of those hands that beat me on the river. So, that kind of stuff happens where you realize sometimes almost immediately, like, I made a mistake. I should have played that different. And I'm not talking about the pure hindsight mistakes. I'm talking about like in the moment, it was like, there was some validity to my thought process, but I definitely didn't make the best choice in the moment. So there's definitely several of those that I would love to do over. I had one miraculous suck out, but that was really it. I mean, I had several bad beats, but only the one, at least there was only one that was obvious to me, where it was like, oh, I definitely got super lucky.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask when you were saying bad beats. The one that only one obvious one that you put on someone else, but you also may have taken a couple along the way.
Oh yeah, I definitely took a handful of bad beats. I had, on my last day, I lost twice significant pots given my stack size to gut shots that got there. So I definitely took bad beats here and there throughout the tournament. I might have given more than the one bad beat because sometimes you don't see their cards at showdown. And it's, so like I can think of a hand where I got value with a straight on, there's a jack high straight on board. I had queen jack, but I had flop top pair and I'm not sure I was behind at any earlier point in the hand. So did I get lucky on the river? Was it only lucky in the sense that it, got him to pay off my river bet because he figures we're chopping most of the time? Or was he ahead at some point and I got really lucky? I'll never know since I didn't see his cards if I had some kind of miracle river that time. The one hand where I definitely got lucky was a guy had lost a huge pot and when he shoved in, it just felt off. And I called with kings and he had aces. And it was kind of like, he's just lost a huge pot. The way he played the hand was kind of strange. It really felt like he might have just been kind of tilt shoving, like, screw you guys. I have ace king, I have tens or jacks or queens, and I'm just like, Like, screw you guys, I'm just going to go in and do it that way. I called him. I was shocked he had aces, but, he played the hand well, and then I sucked out and flopped quads.
Oh, okay. More than just a standard suck out, a suck out that really buried him.
Yeah. No, it was funny. He took it quite well. As soon as the flop came with the 2 kings and I have quads, he was like, "Whoa, this is going to be hard to come back from." Just a very mild-mannered comment. And I was like, wow, like not many people could take it that well.
Right. I'm curious, do people still, 20 plus years after you won, do they still tend to play you differently? Do you find people looking to have a moment against FossilMan, trying to bluff FossilMan, that sort of stuff?
Oh, it's definitely different. I'm pretty sure that, like, let's say we had, some kind of microphone on you and you were playing, you're not as old as me, but you're still kind of a middle-aged white guy. So if they didn't recognize either of us, in the first moment, there's no reason someone would think you and I are going to play all that differently. And I think you have a lot more fold equity than I do. So if I could sit there and I controlled all your decisions, told you exactly what to do, I think you would get folds that I wouldn't get if I was actually sitting there. But it's hard to know anymore. It was definitely a huge, huge difference way back 20 years ago. That next few years after I won, I definitely did not have the fold equity I used to. It's harder to judge today, but I would love to be able to like put on some kind of, huge makeup thing, look completely different and play, not because I want to trick people or take advantage of them. I just want to see is it really different? Or is that now my imagination at this point? But it certainly seems like, I don't know how many times I'm at a table where when someone raises pre-flop, it's usually they win pre or they get like 1 caller. And then I sit there and fold for 40 minutes and then I raise and I get 4 or 5 callers. And I'm just like, coincidence that they happen to have the right kind of hands to call with on this occasion, or was it me? It's, how do I know? But it definitely feels like I have less fold equity. So the good side is that when I'm running good, I can value bet thinner than I would, let's say, recommend you should do. But there's plenty of spots where, again, if I was coaching you, I'd be like, oh, that was a bluff. You should have bluffed in that spot. But then I wouldn't. So I would advise most of my students to bluff this specific river, but not me.
Yeah, well, and now you've given me a great idea for a highly illegal poker scheme where I'm wearing an earpiece and the glasses with the camera in them, and then I have you telling me what to do as I'm playing the cards. Obviously not permissible, but, could be fun.
We could probably find a live stream that would let us do it, and it wouldn't be illegal. But if we didn't tell the other players, but even then, if we just said an anonymous coach is telling you what to do, and the players agreed to it for this live stream, it's not illegal, it's not even unethical, but we still don't know. Like, if you seem to be getting away with several bluffs, we don't know that they wouldn't have folded exactly the same if it had been me sitting there in person. I don't know any good way to test it.
All I know is if we do it, we're doing it with your money, not mine. But I know this year in the tournament, your bust hand came against Rami Hamoud, who is now at the final table, second in chips. So that makes for a nice transition to talk about this upcoming final table. But first, does it make you feel any better knowing someone is taking your chips directly to the final table, has made good use of them, they went to a good home?
Certainly it makes me feel better than if I heard he donked them all off, within the next few hands after busting me. But I played with him a good bit on that table and the day before. He seems like a nice enough guy and no reason to think he isn't, a very friendly, likable person in real life. So I wish him well. And, I remember they did a little interview with me after I'd kind of walked away from the table. And the guy producing that interview was telling me, like, how thrilled after you left, he was so thrilled. He was like, look what I got, and was super excited about it. So that part I really like, the fact that it means something to them. It has value to them. It's not just like, oh, yeah, whatever, dude. And
you're talking specifically about the fossil that you signed for him as you do for...
Correct.
Right. I did see that video of you signing the fossil for him, and it reminded me that I had just read a headline from a few weeks ago where you were interviewed and had a great quote about how if someone is a douche, they don't get the fossil. What percentage would you estimate don't get the fossils?
It's very rare. I mean, I probably play like 100 buy-ins a year, and it's maybe once every 2 years or so that someone doesn't get the fossil. So it's not like you just can be slightly annoying or whatever. You have to do something very specific or just be a constant jerk at the table, and then you don't get the fossil. Most people, anyone listening who's like, well, wait, I knocked you out, I didn't get a fossil, does that mean I'm a douchebag? No, if I can re-enter, you don't get a fossil. So that's the bulk of the time I get knocked out and they don't get a fossil. That's why. It's because I can re-enter. Because you didn't knock me out of that tournament, you just cost me more money. Yeah, anyone who's wondering why they didn't get a fossil, that is almost certainly the reason. You know, it's 99% likely that that is the reason they did not get the fossil.
Right. Okay. Good to clarify for anyone out there who's wondering if they're a douche. But back to this final table. So I guess first on Hamoud, having played with him for a little while, could you tell he was a particularly skillful player who had the potential to go deep?
You know, he was a mix. He was, a little bit loose, a little bit laggy, but that's not a bad thing. It's just a question of how well do you play when you're getting yourselves in these trickier spots by being a laggy player. I didn't see him ever do anything like obviously stupid. And if you play with someone for several hours and they never do something that's obviously dumb, then that's usually a sign that they're mostly making really good decisions. The worst players make it known fairly quickly. So, I knew he had to be at least a pretty good player, and there's a chance he's an exceptional player. I haven't played with him enough to know. I mean, people ask me all the time, like, well, who is really the best player? Who's really the best player? And I'm like, if here's the 20 contenders for the best player, I'm going to need to play with each one of them for dozens of hours, maybe more, before I can actually have a worthwhile opinion as to which one is better than the others. And I just don't get to play with all those people, hardly any of them often enough to have that kind of opinion of their skill level. It's easy to tell the difference between like a good to great player and a totally horrible player, because the horrible players make lots of mistakes. But, there are things that really good players do that look like mistakes, but might not be if you don't know any better. A good example was the hand where our chip leader got a lot of his chips, where he 5-bet bluffed with ace-5 pre-flop, and he got called by, I think it was kings, and then he hit an ace to win a huge pot. So some people would look at that and just say, oh, he's just this maniac, just raise, 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 raise. And he could be. If that's the only hand you've ever seen him play, you can't tell the difference between a really good player who, for whatever reason, knew this was a smart time to do this, and someone who's just a maniac and just going, raise, I'm just going to keep, if I can raise enough to get him to fold, or, he might fold, then I'm just going to keep raising. And it's the mindset that lets you know, whether they're a good player or not. Why did they do it? But since you don't get to find out why, you have to observe thousands of hands before you can figure it all out.
Yeah, really, really tough to judge anyone based on a small sample size. But unfortunately, that's all that you have with Greg FBT Mueller. I had asked you in advance. You told me you've played a little bit of cash against him in the distant past. He's certainly the biggest name who made this final table. In your limited exposure, any particular thoughts on him as a player or as a person?
I have never played No Limit Hold'em with him, or I don't think I ever have. The cash games that I played with him were 400, 800 mix. So we're playing, maybe some of the horse games, but also triple draw, Badoogie, stuff like that. And how someone plays Badoogie doesn't necessarily give you any insight into their No Limit Hold'em game. Certainly he is capable of being very loose and super aggressive, and he's much more of an exploitative player rather than a GTO player. But since I haven't played with him so long, for all I know, he's been studying his ass off on GTO for No Limit Hold'em tournaments, and maybe he has learned all the GTO moves at this point. I couldn't say either way since I haven't played with him in a decade. But the best thing he has going for him is just he's been in so many important situations before. Maybe not the final table of the main event, but he's been at final tables of many, many big tournaments with lots of money on the line, lots of high stakes cash games. So I don't think we're going to ever see him like panic or, like lose his self-control, do something because, like of a brain fart. I'd be shocked if we saw him make that kind of mistake. And all the other players, as far as we know, have the potential to do that because they don't have his experience. They don't have the been there, done that, to back them up. So I'm not saying any of them will make some kind of stupid, silly mistake, but the psychological pressure at the final table is intense. Obviously we're sitting at the table. It's not like I'm getting hot and sweaty, but I remember it when I'm posing for the photos and they're like, oh, hold up the money. And I have like Matt Savage next to me and he's whispering like, oh, thanks for showering. And I'm like, I did shower this morning, but that stress sweat for hours, like, you're never actually damp under your arms, but it did smell pretty horrible. So even if you're handling it well, it's still a super stressful environment. And some people will cave and do that brain fart decision. And then we'll look at it and give them grief about it. And I'll be very sympathetic for them if that happens. Because, until you've been there, done that enough, it's pretty easy to cave into the pressure.
Well, you answered the question people have been wondering about for 22 years. How did Greg Raymer smell immediately after winning the title? Now we know.
Yeah, and I would expect similar from everyone else. I was watching little clips and bits of it. At one point, I found the French language live stream and was watching just a little bit of it, like not even 20 minutes. But I noticed one of the players had just a total sheen on his forehead because he had been stress sweating all day, and so now he just had that oily skin, and I don't remember even which player that was, but I saw that and I noted it. But it's just like, yeah, so what? Like, they're all feeling like that. Now maybe he shouted more than others, I don't know, but you can't avoid how you feel. The question is, can you handle how you feel?
One other thing that I want to drill down on with this final table in particular, there's a player named Lucas Jumelan who has 194 million in chips, and the next most is 79 million. I can't recall if your chip lead in 04 was quite that big, but I know you had a pretty big lead.
30% of the chips, maybe, somewhere in that ballpark at the start of the final table.
Okay, so in the same range, right? Okay, so he has 35%. How big a favorite would you regard? Is it just, mathematically, you just look at it, he has 35% of the chips, you give him about a 35% chance of winning? Is that kind of the way people should view this?
It is, unless you know something about him and you have reason to believe that his game is stronger than the others. He certainly seems to be capable of using that big stack as a weapon. So that theoretically gives you more than 35% because you can know who to hammer on. Like, you don't pick on the shortest stack or two because they have the least ICM pressure. He wants to hammer on someone like Rami and the third and the fourth and the fifth biggest stacks and 3-bet them with a very wide range because now they are the ones who are most concerned about taking a stand. If you're Rami and you raise with ace 10 and now the chip leader 3-bets, it's like, ugh. Like, I know that he might be bullying me and I know he can often have a worse hand, but frequently I'm just not going to be a big favorite against those hands. And even if he has something like Jack 10 where I'm a big favorite, well, the problem is I don't know that. So when the flop comes king high, queen high, 9 high, things that miss me, they all could have hit him because of that wider range. So if Jumelan is going to play like that, then he should have a little more than a 35% chance of winning. If he's going to do something like, coast along, only play premium hands until we get down to, 5 people or whatever, then he's at 35%.
Right. Okay. Let me get your thoughts on a few more general poker topics that arose at the WSOP this year. First off, the implementation of the shot clock mid-tournament. I know it happened after you were out, but are you pro-shot clock, anti-shot clock, pro-shot clock, but not changing the rules on the fly? How do you feel about what the World Series did here?
Overall, I'm anti-shot clock because my concern isn't the person who tanks for a few minutes when it's a big decision. My concern is the person who takes like the full 30 seconds pre-flop every hand. You know, the people that just take extra time when there's no point to it. You know, I forget who it was, but several years ago, there was someone who was averaging like 30 seconds pre-flop. And so even when that player was holding the 7-deuce type of hand, they were still taking over 20 seconds before they did. And there's just no point to that kind of stuff. So the question is, how do we handle that without punishing others? The nice thing about calling clock as a player, if you've been fairly quick and you've only taken extra time when it's a big decision, I give you more time for your big decisions. But that guy who's been taking the 20 to 30 seconds for every pre-flop fold, I don't care if it's the biggest pot yet in the tournament. I'm calling clock on them as soon as like the 1 minute mark comes up. And if they don't like it, like, yeah, tough. You brought it on yourself.
It sounds like maybe you would be in favor of a fairly short pre-flop shot clock throughout it. Like if it was like 15 or 20 seconds for pre-flop decisions, but that's the extent of a shot clock you could endorse.
I understand why they went to the shot clock. I heard about that 15-minute tank, and everyone else at that table was like, yeah, we're cool with it because we all get a pay jump as well. And so now there's no one calling shot clock or calling for the clock on the person stalling.
So maybe is it more that empower the dealers to call a clock when it's egregious? Would that be more of a solution to this sort of problem?
Well, when you're down this deep in a big tournament like the main event, I would think the floors could be the ones that maybe the dealers are told, you know, as soon as someone's taking what seems like extra time, even if no one at the table is saying anything, call the floor, inform them, let the floor decide. If it's clearly a big decision, the floor can give them a little more time. If it's, you know, it's usually pretty obvious when they're just stalling. And now the floor can put them on a 10-second clock. Okay, you've already taken enough time. You got 10 seconds. And players who have been serial offenders of tanking, that has, you know, happened in occasions where the floor has just told someone, like, you have a 10-second shot clock on every decision you make. No exceptions. I don't care if it's, again, the biggest pot yet. You get 10 seconds per decision, and if you don't make it in time, your hand's dead or you check if you're not facing a bet.
Another topic that people have been talking about the last 2 weeks or so, entries for the main event were down for the second straight year. Not by a lot, but still, they're dropping. Does this tell us something about the health of poker, or to you, is this all about external factors like the state of the economy, the 90% tax loss deduction rule, discouraging a handful of people, that sort of stuff?
I certainly don't know what the cause is, but, you know, it's a minor decline. It's not that big a deal. You know, some people posited that, oh, some of the foreigners would rather watch the World Cup games in person and not play the main event. And so maybe that was some number of people who might have played and chose instead to watch their team in the semis. Whatever the reason is, you still have, you know, over 9,000 entries at $10,000 a pop. I'm not worried about the state of the poker economy for that reason whatsoever.
Okay. As for that tax loss deduction rule, was that much of a topic of conversation this year at the World Series? Were a lot of people talking? No,
and it really wasn't coming up. It's not even clear how they're going to enforce that, so to speak, because like as an amateur, I understand it. It's like you have to take all the wins in one column, all the losses in a separate column. And it's always been that if your wins were, let's make up a number, $100, and your losses were more than 100, you could only count the 100. And the wins as an amateur go into other income and your adjusted gross income, and the losses are now a deduction that you're allowed to take, itemized deduction. And that was always horrible anyways, because what if you didn't itemize already? Now you're like, you don't even get to consider any of your losses if you're still using the standard deduction. And it's like, oh, now if it's like, if I won 100 and lost 200, well, what, I can only take 180, but now that still goes down to the 100 like it always did. It's not even obvious how it's going to work. No matter how big the losses are, can I only claim 90 of them against my 100 of wins? I file Schedule C as a professional, so now I'm adding everything up. Do I have to cut each loss by 10%? In their view, Congress usually passes laws that it's never very obvious how it's going to be enforced. And then it's up to the regulatory agency, in this case, the IRS, to actually draft regulations that spell out how this new law is going to be enforced in practice. And the IRS, as far as I know, hasn't done anything. So even if I was a tax professional, it's like, well, what do I tell my clients to do right now? If they haven't figured something out and changed the regulations by the end of the year, what do I tell my clients to do when they file for 2026? I don't even know if the tax experts can answer that for you.
Yeah, a lot of uncertainty around it all, certainly. But okay. Ending on a somewhat nostalgic note, it occurred to me that the 2004 final table had a strong presence this year. You made a deep run. Josh Arieh had a deep run. David Williams was on the broadcast every day. I'm not sure if I have a good question here, but is there some sort of lasting bond among final table mates? I know there's some negative history with you and Arieh, although that was a long time ago. But so, is it good to see him going on a run alongside you and David's on TV and all that? Do you think about that stuff while it's going on?
I don't really think about it much. Certainly, there's something there. If I see anyone from that final table, it's like, hey, it's great to see you. It's been a while. I certainly like David a lot, but, he lives in Vegas and he's a lot younger than me. He's like 20 years younger than me. So it's not like we were ever doing the same things. Back when he was young and single, he was probably going out to party and I was just going to bed early. Josh is a little closer to my age, but again, he lives in Atlanta and you just don't see him much. But, I'm friendly with all those people to the extent, some of them I haven't seen since '04. But, we get along. Mike Matusow and I get along. People always say, oh, you must hate him. He was such a jerk to you. And I'm like, yeah, I did hate him then. But most people like Mike. They just know he's, had some mental health issues that he was self-medicating at the time with street drugs. But now, he takes prescription drugs that his doctor is helping with. And so a lot of those issues are resolved. And he's, a much more likable person than he might have been at the time. But still, his heart is in the right place. So even back then, he's the kind of guy that if you're his friend, he's going to do whatever he can to help you. And so he's got a big heart. Just sometimes he takes his needling a little too far. He's trying to have fun, but, if you cross the line, it's not fun for the other person. But, they used to show him, saying stuff to people on some of the TV shows. And then they didn't show him at the end of the hand, walking around the table, apologizing to the guy and saying, that was over the top. I shouldn't have said that. I'm so sorry. So now he's apologizing 30 seconds later. But a lot of the TV shows aren't showing that part of the interaction. They're just showing him saying whatever, and, and it's fairly insulting. And he's just trying to be funny and all that. And then when it goes too far, he's like, yeah, that was too far. He would apologize to them. So he's not the villain he was made out in the '04 coverage. Most villains aren't as bad as they are presented, and most heroes aren't as good as they're presented in these kind of reality shows.
Right. I'm glad you put that cap on it, because that's exactly what I was thinking, that the edited World Series broadcasts were kind of like reality TV of a sort, where they showed what they needed to create the characters that they were creating.
I have a friend from my last job as a lawyer, and his daughter was a writer for one of those Bigfoot shows. And I was like, writer? It's supposed to be a reality show. And it's like, but what the writers do is the camera crews are out there and these guys are doing their thing, trying to find Bigfoot, which of course is bullshit. But what the writers are doing is they're taking all that raw footage and they are editing, virtually editing it into a storyline. Like this happened and they said this and that. And how can we edit this into a continuous story that will look good on TV? So it's not that they're editing it to falsify it. They're just presenting it in a way that it comes across as a continuous storyline rather than this hodgepodge of separate things. And so that was her job as a writer, to do that for the show, not to tell, like, if you're in the show, Eric, they're not writing a line and saying, oh, this is a good line, Eric, find a time to say this. Like, that wasn't their job.
Well, the big writer up in the sky who mapped out this year's World Series wrote a pretty good script for you for a few days and then turned on you, unfortunately. But it was a good run, and I was glad to see your name up there day after day, and hopefully there are still some more deep runs to come in future years. But for now, I thank you so much for joining me on the podcast, Greg, and I'll point everyone toward, I know you're at FossilMan on Twitter is one way to keep up with you. Is there anywhere else people should go to keep tabs on you?
That's the best place if you want to follow my progress, because when I play tournaments, I'm usually putting up tweets, on the breaks and stuff. I have a website, but I haven't updated it in forever, so they can go to FossilManPoker.com. I mean, if they want to reach me, they can reach me through FossilManPoker.com. I do private lessons over Zoom. I do group seminars when I can get a poker room to book it. Just did one in Ocala Bets in Florida. And hope to do some more this year. Hopefully people enjoy my good runs, and there'll be plenty of deep runs because I'm definitely winning this thing again.
All right. There it is. A nice, bold prediction. Thanks so much for coming on the pod, Greg.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate your company.
Okay, my thanks again to Greg. He mentioned the poker training he does. I'm not sure exactly what year it was, maybe 2007 or so. I attended, as a journalist, a multi-day poker camp put on by the World Poker Tour where he was the lead instructor. And I have to say, he was excellent. I came away with a few little tips and tricks and different ways of thinking about things that really improved my game. And there was a tournament at the end of the camp, and I did have the pleasure of getting into one pot with Greg, and he put on the famous sunglasses and stared me down, and if memory serves, he got me to fold. So you had fold equity with me, at least, Greg, even if you don't with everyone. Maybe that's why I'm forever a low roller. To close out the show this week, I want to talk about a couple of players from my favorite MLB team, the Philadelphia Phillies. Bryce Harper has been in the gambling news for not so great reasons, as a cameo video he recorded, seemingly innocently, was used by a FanDuel VIP to cater to a player who, it turned out, was a gambling addict and is now suing FanDuel. So, Harper isn't being villainized now, but FanDuel is, and maybe with good reason, but also let's remember that it's not always obvious where the line is between good customer and problem gambler. So other than being deceptive with Harper about what his video was being used for, to me the jury is out on whether the VIP host crossed any lines here. As a Phillies fan, though, I'm relieved to say it doesn't appear this will in any way disrupt this fine Phillies season. And meanwhile, as a Phillies fan and a sports bettor, heartbreak for me in the Home Run Derby, where I used my DraftKings 30% profit boost on Kyle Schwarber, started counting my money, and then Jordan Walker of the Cardinals produced the most clutch Derby performance ever, hitting 6 homers in a row when he couldn't afford for any of the first 5 to not go over the fence. I wouldn't call it a bad beat, it's just a painful loss when my win expectation was probably somewhere in the 98% range for a second there. But the good news is, I didn't lose much, because, well, you know the name of the podcast, and you know by now that I always live up to it, or down to it. So until next week, this has been Low Rollers, Small Stakes, and Hot Takes.